Okay, my friends, here we go. We are live right now. So, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim and Assalamu alaikum. We are still doing this ayah. يا أيها الذين آمنوا شهادة بينكم إذا حضر أحدكم الموت حين الوصية اثنان ذوى عدل منكم أو آخران من غيركم. So we did to do the tafsir. We've been doing tafsir all the way from here. And believe it or not, we actually left in this portion. We left off at this portion. And we said that, so this is basically saying that if, that this is basically a prescription for the believers that if they were present during somebody's death and that this dying person was making a will, that there would be two witnesses to witness the will. And we also talked about the story about Adi and Tamim al-Dari, and we went in details in regards to that. And then we said this ayah was revealed, and then we said that there was this debate whether minkum, in other words, this is talking about this is talking about the witnesses and who can be the witnesses. So certainly it said that ذَوَا عَدْل, so they have to be at a certain level of competence. And when we're speaking about competence, we're speaking about one, religious competence, in other words, religious integrity. And the second competence is basically the competence to remember, to basically be a person that we can be certain that they are they're competent enough to be witnesses. So in other words, physically or at least mentally, and also religious competence and their honesty as well. In other words, morally. Okay. Now, then the debate goes into minkum. Is this talking about that the witnesses be one, minkum, from you? And then the word you, which is the pronoun kum right there, and the min ghayrikum, or two from the other ones, is this pronoun kum right there. If we're saying that this pronoun kum is the first one, at least, that there would be from you, i.e. from the Muslims, then that would basically mean min ghayrikum, or two other witnesses from two others. Would that others basically be referring to disbelievers? So that was the first opinion. The second opinion basically said that no, the kum is not involving the Muslims and the disbelievers, but is actually involving from the family. So therefore, this would be meaning from your family, and the min ghayrikum, or from basically some other people, the random people that are probably not from the family. And then we went in another opinion that basically said that this segment of it, at least the akharani min ghayrikum, that this segment of it is actually abrogated. So just these three opinions, even if you're not necessarily going to be a judge, okay, it's important to understand how the whole process of verifying, one, the validity of a certain opinion, or whether one opinion is stronger than the other, or which one is more preponderant, etc. At least understanding, let's call it the science, the physics of how we determine one opinion as stronger than the other, or the debate, and how the whole debate happens. Even if you're not necessarily going to probably discuss this, and you're probably not interested in knowing the details about making a will, because you're probably poor like me, you don't have a lot of money, so you're not really concerned about having someone to witness your the millions that are going to leave behind, because you probably don't even have those kind of millions. But it's important to at least learn, like I said, the dynamic, the physics, the whole concept and the paradigm of how fiqh is discussed. Okay, so that's the whole idea of what we're trying to learn today. Let's look at it. So the first opinion, and we talked about that last time, and we said that they had basically mentioned minkum to mean that this is referring, that is the pronoun kum right there, from you, that is the you referring to Muslims, or from to others, that is referring to basically the disbelievers right there. And they basically had said, well, we've got an evidence to prove this interpretation. The first one, well, they said, hey, you look at the context within the hadith and within the ayah, and you would see that the context within the ayah is telling us that this is basically speaking about, hey, two people that are Muslim with two people that are not Muslim. After all, we've got a hadith and the reason for the revelation with Adi ibn Badda and also Tamim al-Dari. So therefore, we're basically getting the inspiration from the reason for the revelation, and that's to basically tell us that this was referring to the pronoun referring to Muslims and non-Muslims being witnesses when basically Muslim witnesses are not present. And certainly they said, we've got another evidence to prove this. They said, we've got three other Sahaba that also said that the reason for the revelation was basically the story about Tamim al-Dari and Adi ibn Badda, such as Abu Musa al-Ash'ari, Abdullah bin Qais, and Abdullah ibn Abbas. And then they basically said that the summary would be that if you're basically present and someone is dying, they wanted to make a will, and there was, well, whether there were two Muslim witnesses present, or maybe there weren't two Muslim witnesses present. So in that situation, that would mean that the two other non-Muslim witnesses would be an alternative in this situation to verify the witness for this will. Okay, so this is basically the opinion that you could see Abu Musa al-Ash'ari, Sa'id ibn Musayyib. Now, Abu Musa al-Ash'ari is a Sahabi. Sa'id ibn Musayyib was basically a Tabi'i, and certainly all these, Abi Mijliz, Shuraih. Shuraih was, many people would think he's a Sahabi, but Shuraih, even though he basically did become Muslim during the Prophet's time, but Shuraih didn't make it to see the Prophet because he died 5 years before, well, I mean, the Prophet died after Shuraih had become Muslim by 5 years, but Shuraih never made it to see the Prophet. He was in Yemen at the time. Okay, let's continue right there. And we've got other scholars as well. These are fuqaha scholars. And by the way, let me tell you a secret. You see Sufyan al-Thawri, okay? And let's say other ones, Mujahid. You see certain figures right there. Sa'id ibn Jubair, well, he was a tabi'i, but you see some of these figures. I want you to look at this. Some of these figures, they actually had their own madhab. What does that mean? That means they themselves were actually a school on their own, meaning like the Hanafi school, like the Maliki school, like the Shafi'i school. These were excellent scholars that their madhab just didn't make it to be something that was famous, but it doesn't mean that they were less of, let's say, within their scholarship than the scholars like Abu Hanifa. So let's just see that. Okay, let's see. Ahmad ibn Hanbal as well, he basically said the witness of Ahl al-Dhimma, when we're speaking about the witness of non-Muslims, that wouldn't necessarily be permitted at all times. And they said that would be exclusive and only when, of course, during travel and there was no Muslim witness to verify basically that will. And because we need to verify that information, and the only available witnesses were the non-Muslims, so just exclusive to those exceptional cases, that's when we would take the non-Muslims witness in those exceptional cases. And we're not making this up. They said we've got the ayah to basically tell us that during these exceptional cases that would be accepted. Okay. And of course, just keep that one in mind, because when we're speaking about the evidences in these regards and what we need to verify in terms of evidences and so forth, it's not about a narrative. It's not about, oh, let's be inclusive. We go back to the Quran and Sunnah to understand what makes something as valid, let's say in witness, or valid in terms of evidence. It's not an issue of narrative. It's not an issue of, oh, do you consider them second class, or do you consider them first class? That's not an issue of narrative. That's an issue of deen. Okay, just keep that one in mind. Let's see the second opinion. The second opinion basically said just this portion. Which portion? The portion أو آخران من غيركم. This opinion basically said that this portion of it is actually abrogated. Well, wait a minute. So what does abrogated actually mean? The word is mansukh. So what does that mean? That means we read it, but we don't apply it. Wait a minute. So why we read it, you don't apply it? What does that mean? You recognize that it's in the Quran, but you don't want to do it? Why not? Well, that's because they considered, when we're speaking about mansukh, that the Prophet ﷺ, or evidence to prove that we don't apply it because the ruling and the application was basically canceled out by another religious order or by another revelation. Okay, so it's not that we're just not going to apply it because we just don't want to apply it, or because we just basically want to leave the word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. No, it's basically taking another revelation, another decree, and that cancels out the previous decree. Okay, but in order to consider that something is mansukh, we basically have to know which one happened first and later. In other words, which one preceded the other. That's number one. Number two, we also need to verify that by Sahaba to basically tell us that that was really later abrogated, and the application was basically regarded as mansukh for such and such reasons. Okay, let's see who said that, and let's look into it deeper. So that was the claim that it was abrogated was basically mentioned by Zayd ibn Aslam, Malik, Shafi'i, Abu Hanifa, in a number of different other fuqaha. But Abu Hanifa, he generally said that it would be permissible to take the disbelievers' witness upon themselves, and that their witness upon the Muslims is not acceptable. So wait a minute, how and what evidence do you have to prove that this was abrogated? It's not enough to make a claim. You got to put in the witnesses. Prove to me that this was abrogated. They said, sure, you've got 1A. Here's number 1. They said, well, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, مِمَّن تَرْضَوْنَ مِنَ الشُّهَدَاءِ. The ones that you would take as a witness are the ones that the word تَرْضَوْنَ, the ones that were basically accepted or considered as competent to be as witnesses. And they said, well, we certainly cannot accept somebody if they lack religious integrity to be a person that we can consider basically holding any faith or holding basically the religious integrity is basically not there. If somebody lacked religious integrity, even if they were Muslim, and we're not going to accept their witness, how is it with somebody that's not even Muslim? So they considered that this person is not competent, period. The second evidence, they said the ayah says, وَأَشْهِدُوا ذَوَيْ عَدْلٍ مِّنْكُمْ. They said in the ayah says that you're going to choose witnesses, you're going to get the witnesses that basically are to adl. They're supposed to be competent. And they said, how is it that they're going to be competent? How is it that they're going to be competent if basically they're lacking religious integrity? They don't even have the faith. And therefore, to basically consider that they are serious about taking their witness seriously if they're not taking their religion seriously. Are they really going to take their witnesses seriously? So that's a second opinion. And they also said that وَأَشْهِدُوا ذَوَيْ عَدْلٍ مِّنْكُمْ. They said that was the latest of what was revealed. In other words, they said, then since we know that this was basically coming later, then in that situation, remember the whole idea about something being abrogated is understanding the chronology. So if I don't know that something happened, which one happened first and which one happened second, because what happened second is going to cancel out the first. What happened second is going to cancel out the first. So they said, simple. They said this was actually revealed as the latest, and therefore that cancels out the first, which is Surah Al-Ma'ida. Okay, and therefore they said, here we go. Because at the same time, it says, مِمَّنْ تَرْضَوْنَ مِنَ الشُّهَدَاءِ. And of course, it's all about making sure that they have their religious competence. And they said there was no Islam at the time in basically anywhere in the world except in Medina. And certainly at the time, if somebody is on a journey, they weren't going to find competent witnesses if they're outside of Medina, because there were no other Muslims anywhere in the world anyways. And here we go. And they said our fourth evidence. They said our fourth evidence is all the Muslims had unanimously agreed that the fasiq, which is a person that lacks religious integrity, that they can't be a witness. Who's a person that lacks religious integrity? A person that lacks religious integrity maybe doesn't pray. Maybe they're not serious about their prayer. Maybe doesn't wear hijab. Maybe doesn't care about the religion itself, drinks, does drugs, steals. That's a person that lacks religious integrity. If they don't care about the ruling of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and they're willing to steal, or they're willing to drink, or they're willing to do something haram, then in that situation, that person wouldn't really care about another principle, which is fraud witness, to basically be committed by them. To them, hey, you could easily pay them $100, and to them, yeah, so you want me to witness on that? Well, to them, it's basically another way of making money. They didn't care that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will hold them accountable for stealing. They didn't care that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala hold them accountable for drinking. If they didn't care to do that, then that person lacks religious integrity. They lacked religious integrity, and they said, well, the kuffar themselves, they basically lack religious integrity entirely because they don't even have the faith to hold on to in terms of holding on to certain principles of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. See how? Look at the adab. I want you to listen to this one. Look at the adab. Al-Qurtubi said, well, what you had actually said was true, but we're not going to basically agree with you and even say what you are saying. Why not? They said, well, because the witness for Ahl Dhimma would only be permitted exclusively in situations where we're speaking about exceptional cases, which is during a travel, and basically there's a necessity, and we had no other witnesses to be present to verify or at least to preserve the witness in regards to that will. So in that situation, we're just not saying necessarily that this was abrogated, but we're just going to say that this is exclusive, that this ayah that allowed the witness of Ahlul Kitab is exclusive to the situations where there was no possibility to have two Muslim witnesses witnessing in this exceptional case where somebody is dying, trying to make a will, no one was there to verify, to document this will, and therefore we need to find any, let's call it, shred of witness, and this is that shred of witness that we're going to use despite. And look at the adab again. He said, as for what you had claimed of abrogation, he said, no one had actually witnessed this claim. And he said, the only ones that we know of that actually talked about from the Sahaba, that talked about the ayah and what it relates to, are basically those three Sahaba that we had mentioned earlier, which is Abdullah ibn Abbas. Let's look at their names again. Abdullah ibn Abbas, and who else did we talk about? Abdullah ibn Qais, Abu Musa al-Ash'ari. Those were the only ones that basically gave us details in regards to why and what was the circumstance that related the revelation for this ayah. And he said, in going against the Sahaba and making a claim and stating that it was abrogated, etc., when you don't really have an evidence that proves that this was abrogated, basically said, sorry, but we're not going to submit to this claim. And he said, well, the other piece that supports our objection is Surah Al-Ma'ida was part of the last surahs that were revealed, and that's what was that was the opinion of Ibn Abbas, Al-Hasan, and he said there's nothing that was abrogated in it. So therefore, we're not going to necessarily submit to such a claim and that it was actually abrogated. Let's see the third opinion. The third opinion, they basically said, well, it's not actually abrogated. Well, what is it? Well, so they said, well, the first minkum is basically just referring to your own family, to your own people, because usually the people that know the details about what wills you're making and what you really want, etc., is basically going to be your family. Your parents, your brothers, your siblings, those are basically the people that know more about your wishes and what you really want, about your money. They have the information in regards to your money, in regards to your wishes, in regards to your family, in regards to basically your hopes, desires, etc. Those are basically going to be your family. The other ones basically saying, well, if minkum is going to refer to family, that would actually mean that ghayrikum, the min ghayrikum, or to other witnesses, is basically referring min ghayri al-qaraba aw al-ashira. I said that would basically al-Qurtubi. He objected to it and he said, I'm sorry, but that's not actually an acceptable interpretation. Why not? They said, because they said that's not an acceptable evidence because min ghayrikum is basically, if you were to say it's referring to different a different type, then in Arabic language, you can't say, I ate all the bananas except the zucchini. Well, the zucchini is not part of the bananas, but you would, in proper Arabic, it would be, I ate all the bananas except the ripe ones. It has to be from the same kind. I ate all the bananas except the ripe ones, because the ripe bananas are part of those general ones, but not I ate all the bananas except the zucchini. It doesn't make sense, because the exception right there is supposed to be involving as part of the same type. So they said this is not acceptable. Those that objected, that was their objection. They said that doesn't make sense. But we're just listing out the different opinions right there. Let's see the other matter. Abu Hanifa had said that this ayah is also an evidence to prove that the kuffar themselves, in situations where the Muslims are basically in governance, that when the Muslims are in governance, so can we basically be the court system, even when it comes to the disbelievers, dispute and arguments and all these different things? The answer is yes. We can be, in order to manage the society from crime, etc. But certainly, the people that are from the same type, they basically deal with each other. So you will see Christians basically dealing with Christians, Jews dealing with Jews, etc., Muslims dealing with Muslims, and this is absolutely normal. Okay, because hey, we share common principles, we share common thoughts, we share common interests, and based on that, we would basically relate to one another. But here's the thing. What if we had a court system and we basically had, let's say, two Christian people coming forward, or let's say a Christian wife and a Christian husband? The wife came forward and she said, hey, I'm going through domestic violence. Should we, as a Muslim government, actually intervene and look into the situation? That's the difference of opinions between scholars. The first opinion is that, yes, certainly. Because if you don't solve these disputes, well, you as a Muslim government would have basically the law enforcement, you would have the police, you would have the power in prison, you have the responsibility to rule in justice and make sure that people's rights are basically given to them. The second opinion considered that no, they have their own principles, they have their own rulings, and to rule based on our rules is basically going to be against their, let's call it, justice system or their principle. So it makes no sense to rule based on our rules and apply it on them. Okay, I'm just laying out the difference of opinions right there. And this comes in within this area. So Abu Hanifa said, yes, we can actually have the disbelievers themselves actually be witnesses upon themselves. So the Christians basically rule, or not rule, sorry, but witness on Christians, etc. And therefore, that would be, according to Abu Hanifa, that's what that ayah was also referring to. Okay, and it's quite interesting how their issue is not necessarily to be inclusive or not. Their issue is, well, what is the text saying? What is the ayah supporting? That's what matters. It's not an issue of wanting to impress others, wanting to appear inclusive. The main issue is, what does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala want of us? That's the key thing. What does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala want of us? Okay, and of course, certainly you could see that the response from Al-Qurtubi, he said, well, I'm sorry, but this is actually not necessarily supported by evidence. Why not? He said, well, if we can't even accept their witness on Muslims, how are we going to accept if the default is basically saying that their witness is to be rejected. How is it that we're going to accept their witness on something that is considered as a subcategory and not the main category? So just looking into that, just letting you know. Okay, in antum darabtum fil ard. In antum darabtum fil ard, we said that this is a compound compound word, and daraba fil ard literally means strike on ground or strike on earth. But this isn't talking about striking on earth. Somehow we're right there, just somehow striking on earth in any shape or form. But this is actually talking about in a state, in a situation where traveling was involved. So that means safartum. Okay, and certainly in Lugha Arabiya, there is something that is al-hadf. What does that mean? So the sentence itself would basically be abbreviated, but the abbreviation in it would basically be two kinds. There's an abbreviation where sounds like an acronym. So just like when we say hawqala, okay, that means la hawla wa la quwwata illa billah. Or for example, give me another one. Alhamd or tahmid, that would be in regards to alhamdulillah rabbil alameen. Okay. Al-basmala, that would be Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. It's an abbreviation, but the abbreviation is different kinds. There's the abbreviation where it involves an acronym. There's an abbreviation that basically involves a whole sentence, would be basically we put in one. And just like, for example, ish, li-ish, for example. Even though many would think that that's not classical Arabic, the truth of the matter is that it is. It basically means لأي شيء. It's an ism fi'l, which means لأي شيء. علاش, for example, على أي شيء. It's actually لغة عربية فصحى, believe it or not. It's actually classical Arabic. Many would think alash is, or leish or ish or something like that is basically not classical Arabic, but it actually is. It's an abbreviation to ala أي شيء or leish, لأي شيء, etc. and so forth. So when we're looking at it as an abbreviation, and that would be a form of hadf. So we would sometimes, some sentences, some words are omitted, but such omittance does not necessarily mean that we could inject our own wordings or our own statement. So we would need the context in order to verify and to help us understand, well, what was the sentences or the statements that were omitted? Okay, so that's a thing. And when you're looking at what was omitted, this is basically saying, well, since we had said before that this is talking about the two witnesses in situations where we would basically be on a journey, this person is dying, needed two witnesses to verify or at least back up and document this will, then this is talking about in antum darabatum fil ard, situations where you are dying, and this would be the context of it. Okay, so yes, there was something that was omitted in that sentence. Well, that's because it was mentioned before. Okay, so that's that piece of abbreviation of it. تحبسونهما من بعد الصلاة. Wait a minute, so what does that mean? So the word tahbis actually means to imprison. So what are we going to do? We're going to put them in prison just to make the witnesses? I mean, why are they treated like criminals? They didn't do anything wrong. Why are they treated like criminals? This isn't treating them like criminals, okay? At all. We're going to get to that point. So why are we somehow holding them or basically imprisoning them, putting them at some kind of a place where, no, we just need to verify something here. Okay, we're going to get to that. Okay, and why ba'd salah? So is it a bigger haram to make a sin after Salat al-Asr from before, like during Dhuhr, yes, we're going to talk about that. Really? To make a lie after Asr is worse than making a lie before Asr? Yes, we're going to get to that. Okay, let's see. When we're looking at the other part, we're going to talk about this I mean بعد الصلاة in just a bit. فأصابتكم مصيبة الموت. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says فأصابتكم مصيبة الموت. What is الإصابة? الإصابة actually means to happen to you, a calamity. You're pricked with something. And the word مصيبة is a calamity, is a predicament, is a dilemma. Okay, so when you're talking about musibatul maut, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is calling death as a musibah, as a calamity. So wait a minute, is death necessarily a calamity? It is, but which is worse? A person losing their deen or a person basically facing death? Which is worse? Okay, so just in general, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala basically tells us that musibatul maut is basically, it's a big calamity, but what's even worse than this is a person basically losing their deen. So when we're speaking about death, eventually, and there's no running away, we're all going to die. But one thing, it's a bigger calamity if a person loses their deen, because eventually, and there's no running away from death, but there's one thing that you want to make sure that you maintain, which is your hereafter. This life is a very short life. You live 20 years, 25, 70, 80, 90, 110, good luck for you. Okay, but no matter how long you live for, eventually, and there's no way, it's an inevitable thing. You're gonna face death no matter how long you basically live for. So having that being said, the most important thing is preserving your deen, and preserving your akhirah is basically what it means to preserve your deen. And I want you to look at this hadith. He said, روي عن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم لو أن البهائم تعلم من الموت ما تعلمون ما أكلتم منها سمينا. The hadith is quite interesting, although the hadith, let's say, he said, أخرجه القضاعي في الشهاب. Why don't you look at this? Even though, like, there's a hadith number, al-Bayhaqi, and you could see all of that, but just because it has a reference, it doesn't necessarily make it authentic. Well, what does the hadith anyways say? According first, you can see that some of the scholars that basically said there's a narrator, Abdullah ibn Salama ibn Aslam, that Ad-Daraqutni had said that he was a weak narrator. Abu Na'im said that he was matruk. In other words, we don't take his hadith. And you could see that this hadith is basically a place of question, which is why Al-Qurtubi used something called it-tad'if. What does that mean? He wasn't definite in his statement, but he was basically giving an indication that there was some scrutiny required in regards to this hadith, that there's something in a place of doubt in regard to the validity of this hadith. Let's say, what does he say? لو أن البهائم تعلم من الموت ما تعلمون. If the animals knew of death what you know about death, you would not have been capable of eating any flesh out of it. Meaning what? So when animals would eat and they would live their life, they don't have an idea about death. They don't recognize that there's life, there's death, what after, and all of that. Their memory is short, their recognition, well, it depends on what memory you're talking about. Okay, but it's not like our understanding. Our understanding of life, death, and so forth is definitely a lot more thorough than animals. But at the same time, if a person was so fixated on death, then if their They're not capable of living their life and probably doing their responsibilities at home. It's a mother. She's constantly thinking about death. She's constantly just thinking, well, what if my son dies? What if my husband dies? What's going to happen, etc. Then that's a mental illness that requires maybe medication, requires therapy, and basically requires treatment. Okay. Now, but if the person is thinking of death as the way to motivate them to do more, maybe study, maybe make a better religious commitment, maybe a plan for their akhirah more, that's a positive way of thinking about death. That's completely different. That doesn't require any treatment. That's actually what it means to live as motivated by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, what it means to live religion. It's basically to let that recognition drive you towards putting in that commitment in your deen. Okay. Now, what does all of what I had said relate to this hadith? That the Prophet ﷺ was basically saying in this hadith that's not authentic, that if the animals had known what you had known about death, then they would not have been whatever capable of even eating, because they would go in depression. Do animals go in depression? Do they actually go? Yeah, we know that. We know that as a fact. Yes, they do. For those that lived on ranches or lived on or lived with animals, certainly animals do have, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala actually said, وَمَا مِن دَابَّةٍ فِي الْأَرْضِ وَلَا طَائِرٍ يَطِيرُ بِجَنَاحَيْهِ إِلَّا أُمَمٌ أَمْثَالُكُم. Whether we're speaking about animals that walk on earth or birds that fly up, or they basically have umamun amthalukum, they're nations like you. They would be saddened about the loss of their child. They would be saddened and probably not stop eating and stop drinking and all of that because of the intense, probably emotions in that situation. And they would face what you would be facing. So the Prophet ﷺ was saying, if the animals would have known, they would have actually not eaten anything, and that would affect their milk production, or probably affected their flesh. In other words, you would not have been capable of even eating. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala basically created the animals to be subjugated to you. So you, as a human being, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had permitted that you would slaughter the animal for the purpose of food, because they don't have a purpose in their life. Their purpose is to basically feed you. That was their purpose. And that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, whether it's to feed you or whether it's to make life for you, etc. So they were subjugated for you. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala permitted that you would slaughter a goat, slaughter a sheep, and that was for the purpose of, let's say, consumption, or the purpose of making use probably of whatever is probably in their body that is of benefit to you. So in that situation, just recognizing that what makes the principle of whether we're speaking about slaughtering an animal or even using their body or using their leather or whatever it is, what makes it permissible is basically, for one, that it would be used for the purpose that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had permitted. Okay, let's continue right there. Number 9, تحبسونهما. Does that mean that we can actually imprison somebody? What does imprisonment mean, and what does it involve? Imprisoning somebody involves that you would confine them in, whether in a room, confine them in a specific area, but certainly you can't confine them without giving them food and water. So is confinement permissible? Based on this ayah, yes, it is. Now, it's important to mention, when it comes to criminal law and punishment, Islam had allowed certain punishments to be used, such as one, we're speaking about the death penalty. Now, that's the capital punishment in certain situations. It's important to mention scholars had differences of opinions on whether such capital punishments, or at least such punishments, on whether they could only be exclusive to certain crimes or whether similar or other crimes, which basically is called ta'zir. So let's give an example. So ta'zir would be a judgment given by the judge, which uses and involves different methods of one, punishment, or different methods of ensuring justice. So what does that look like? If somebody, let's say, is selling drugs, and we know that selling this drug is so strong that it could lead to the death of the consumer, then in that situation, the qadi will say, well, since it leads to death, then we have to basically put stronger fines and penalties on such crimes to ensure that such crimes do not happen. Because we know that people recognize penalties, and penalties, if we were to apply them, that they are capable of ensuring zawajir. What is zawajir? Ensuring that people would abstain from committing such a crime because they would recognize that the penalty is going to be harsh. Now, having that being said, there are 14 different types of punishments or penalties that scholars basically had discussed, and one after another, basically each and every single one of them, can we use flogging as a method? And if we are to use flogging, well, we know that zina, for a person that was never married before, that they would get 100 lashes. Well, what about drinking? Is it 80 lashes, 40 lashes, etc.? Differences of opinions? Okay, well, what if the person was doing a different type of a crime? This crime was, let's say, maybe they're just walking down the street and making pranks on people. And these pranks are resulting in perhaps ruining people's properties. What is this person doing? He's making a prank where he's probably just splashing water on people to see their reaction. But splashing water basically resulted in damage it for people's phones, for people's properties, etc. And this person is thinking, well, hey, I'm getting views, making pranks, and I'm getting money. And yeah, regardless, at least I'm getting views and I'm making money out of these pranks. And in that situation, well, what do we do? How do we stop this person? Is there a certain ayah or a certain hadith that says, well, if a person is pranking and this is what they had done, there isn't a certain hadith or an ayah. So what, are we going to leave them on the loose like that, causing damage to people's properties and basically making a laugh and joking about it? Well, the answer is no. The qadi can intervene in such situations and do something called a ta'zir. What is it, ta'zir? Ta'zir is basically the qadi himself can use some kind of a penalty. So whether it's to pay a fine, whether probably imprisonment, 3-month imprisonment, 5 months, a year, 2 years, something that would basically compensate and be equivalent to the harm that was done. Okay. Or, hey, what about flogging? Can we use that? Or is that exclusive to certain felonies or to certain crimes like zina, drinking? Can we use other corporal punishments? What is a corporal punishment? Corporal punishment basically means you're harming the body. So we know that in Islam, there is a corporal punishment. There's no doubt about that. If you steal, your hand is basically amputated. And if you steal again, your other arm or your other hand is basically amputated. And if you were to terrorize people and steal from them, then in that situation, we're going to amputate your leg and amputate your right leg or your left leg and your right arm. So basically, the opposite of one another. Definitely, that's corporal punishment right there. Are we going to extend such corporal punishments to other behaviors, to other crimes, basically? Let's say somebody is selling meth, somebody is cocaine, whatever it is, selling drugs. Can we extend corporal punishments? Is that something that the Qadi can use? Differences of opinions between scholars. Now, I want to look at, I basically wanted to explain all of that just to look at the word تحبسونه. So can we use imprisonment as a way to deter people from different crimes? That's the question. Or when we're using imprisonment, is it necessarily to deter certain people, or can it be for the reason that, okay, we're here imprisoning you, not necessarily because this is to deter you from a certain crime, but this is to basically make it into a process. Well, wait, what do you mean into a process? That's the point that we're talking about. So you've got people's rights are basically in two different categories. There's a type of right that, hey, you can get that immediately. And there's a type that, well, you can't really get that immediately. So what does that look like? If we're speaking about immediately, let's say this person is a millionaire. They have the money. They just have a habit of procrastinating, giving people their rights. So one day he borrowed $20,000 from this person, and this person is a millionaire, but he just has a habit of not wanting to give people their rights. Then in that situation, what are we going to do? We're just going to wait for his religious integrity to wake up? He doesn't even care. To him, I'm not going to give you $20,000, even though he's got all the money. But he just doesn't care. And some people are like that. Wallahu al-musta'an. So what are we going to do in such situations? Are we going to let that person get away with their crime? Or are we going to intervene as a government and basically say, wait a minute, you've got the money, and therefore we're going to make sure, since this is an immediate thing, that you cannot afford to give him that $20,000, then in that situation, certainly we will imprison you, and there will be basically a confinement order from the government if you don't give the person, because we were capable of seeing your bank statements, we were looking into your account, and we were, as a government, capable of knowing that you have the money. We saw all the titles, all the different realties that you have, and we know that you've got the money, and therefore we're going to imprison you if you don't basically sign the order. Or we can also use something like basically the what do they call that? Collection agency to basically look into your accounts and basically deduct from your accounts whatever is to pay back this person. Okay, same thing. And some of those are basically going to be delayed. What? So this person, perhaps, okay, perhaps this person maybe is not there anymore. Yes, he did have the money. We basically looked for him, and this person probably flew out of the country. Now we're not capable of ensuring through civil court order to make sure that this person pays back all of that. Basically now is gone. What are we going to do in that situation? And in that situation, we can do irrahan. So what does that mean? The government can place an order on some of the property or some of the money that is basically there and say, hey, if you do not pay the money that you owe to that person, we will be selling your car and the government will take over basically your property, confiscate it, sell it in order to pay what you already owe to this person. So that would be rahan. They would basically take it as kind of like what is that called? Rahan would be like give me the word for it. Forgot the word for it, but forgot the word for it. Okay. Or there could be another thing is that we could have somebody like a power of attorney basically working on their behalf. And this power of attorney can say, okay, yes, he's not available, but I'll put a power of attorney. I'll basically give someone the power of attorney to basically pay you on my behalf. But of course, the power of attorney process is probably taking time because a power of attorney, in order to act on their behalf, this power of attorney is basically needing some time to process, to notarize, to all of that. So we're basically looking at sometimes, so in that situation, will we be confining the actual person, or will we be confining now the power of attorney? The power of attorney is just basically just trying to help. He's not the one that is procrastinating paying back the person their money. He's just basically trying to help. And now can we confine the power of attorney? How are we going to deal with all of this? Are we gonna hold the power of attorney responsible right now? All right, so that's that issue of debate basically between scholars, and just recognize and certainly if one basically, if we're talking about certain penalties, certain crimes, you can't have someone else basically take the crime or the penalty for it. Let's say someone stole something. Okay, if someone stole something and someone else said, oh, I'll put that person in a power of attorney, and then basically the person didn't come back, are we going to punish, basically amputate that power of attorney's arm? No. So things like hudud and qisas. Qisas is like a capital punishment, or hudud, which basically are corporal punishments. Okay, those would not be something that we can do to another person, except the person, in other words, the transgressor or the person that committed the felony himself. We can't pass it on to someone else because that's expanding the area of punishment. The person that committed the crime is basically the person that we're going to hold accountable. So what about the person that just didn't pay back the money? What are we going to do? Can we actually imprison them? Yes, we can, but only if they were capable of paying and they were just procrastinating just for the sake of procrastination. So if this person doesn't have the money, let's say this person, yes, they borrowed $10,000 from you, but then their business just didn't work out. And this person is actually homeless. Are we going to imprison them and say, not until you pay $10,000? Well, they can't even afford their eating and drinking and a bed to sleep on. Or do they really have the money to give you $10,000 when they don't even have the money to eat and drink? Well, that's not fair. So that person, we wouldn't imprison them for such a thing. But I want you to look at this hadith. لَيُّ الْوَاجِدِ يُحِلُّ عِرْضَهُ وَعُقُوبَتَهُ. This hadith is an important hadith. What is لَيُّ الْوَاجِد? What is لَيُّ الْوَاجِد? لَيُّ الْوَاجِد, al-lay, basically would mean that the person that has the money, which is al-wajid, they have money, yajidul mal, they basically have the money, but this person is just procrastinating. You're like, can I have my $20,000 back? You've got $1 million. I need my money back. But the guy, you call them and they basically have blocked their phone. You go to their house, they wouldn't even open the door. You send another person and they just don't care. And you are trying as much as you can. You just need those $20,000 back. That's what the Prophet ﷺ had basically said. Layul wajid, that person that has the money, if they don't pay it back, then in that situation, it is the person's right, basically that person that is the victim here would basically have the right to complain, to talk about, and let's say announce their right. In other words, they have the right to announce what they had suffered and what they had struggled with. So they would have the right to announce and say, hey, this person took $20,000 from me. They never returned it. This person, I went to their house. I called them. They have me blocked, etc. They have the right to complain. They have the right, and it's not considered backbiting or gossiping, because this person is right now a victim, and the victim would have the right to seek justice. Okay? Would have the right to seek justice. Now, Al-Khattabi, this is a very important person. Al-Khattabi basically is a scholar that did a very important sharh, okay? Basically explaining Sahih, Sunan Abu Dawud. And he said there are two kinds of confinement, imprisonment, basically. One is the type of confinement that involves uquba. It's basically uquba, a punishment. And there is habsu istidhar, a confinement. We're not confining this person as a way of punishment, but we're confining this person to do further investigation. So we're confining this person to further investigate because we don't want them having access to phones, perhaps in discussing and making up a lie or an agreement with another person, etc. So we're confining them just for further investigation. Is that person a criminal? No, they're not, but further investigation is needed. So we might actually confine them for al-istidhar. Okay, so just wanted to note that one. And that was actually practiced by Shuraih al-Qadi and so forth. Well, what about Ba'd Salat al-Asr? Why did it say Ba'd Salat al-Asr? Because, it didn't say Ba'd Salat al-Asr, but it said after Salat, Ba'd as-Salat. Okay, let's see right there. First, let's just go in details with this one. Punishment is only in something that is obligatory. So what does that mean? But that's why you look into the hadith, for example. The Prophet ﷺ said in the hadith, علموا أبناءكم الصلاة وهم أبناء سبع. Teach your children how to pray at age 7. And then if they reach the age of 10 and they still didn't do their salah, then that's when you're going to use punishment as a way for discipline. So as parents, they can't punish their children on a condition that they would not basically harm the body. Harm the body, whether it's bruising, cutting, or perhaps breaking, etc. That would be haram. Okay, all right, let's continue. Min ba'd as-salah, and that's going to be, inshallah, the final point we're going to discuss. So min ba'd as-salah, they would be confined for further investigation, that is the witnesses, and what it was referring to was basically Salat al-Asr. Majority of the scholars actually said that would be Salat al-Asr because most of the people, even people from other faiths, they would consider a special kind of a sanctity after Salat al-Asr. So they would avoid lying after Salat al-Asr. And some scholars actually said it was referring to Salat al-Dhuhr. And, well, here's the thing. Why even after Salah? They said it was in order to let the person still have that religious inspiration and be considerate to committing to the principles of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and having religious integrity. So it's basically to give sanctity to the timing and basically let them recognize that the malaika are witnessing at that time. And that's why the Prophet ﷺ had said, من حلف على يمين كاذبة بعد العصر لقي الله وهو عليه غضبان. Whoever makes an, let's see, look at this hadith. So this hadith is basically in al-Bukhari and Muslim, making it an authentic hadith. Another statement that al-Bukhari had basically mentioned, that the Prophet ﷺ had said, ثلاثة لا يكلمهم الله يوم القيامة ولا ينظر إليهم ورجل حلف. And part of that, basically, these three dots are basically telling us that, I wanted to summarize it, ورجل حلف على يمين كاذبة بعد العصر ليقتطع بها مال رجل مسلم. Well, what happened? So this hadith is basically saying three people, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would not talk to them on Judgment Day and not even look at them. And amongst the three people, he had mentioned a man that was making an oath, but he was lying about the oath after Salat al-Asr, after al-Asr. What does that mean? There is a special sanctity in regards to Salat al-Asr. The sin a person might commit after Salat al-Asr is actually worse than the sin one might commit before Salat al-Asr. Wow. Just imagine. Just imagine. Okay. هذه الآية أصل في التغليظ في الأيمان. So this ayah is basically a basis in order to basically regard and speak about the dangers of making a false oath. What is a false oath? Saying wallahi and lying about it. What are the different things in order for us to make sure that the person is basically committed to their oath? So one, there is this area of timing, maybe after Salat al-Asr, or right after prayer, or maybe a place like al-Masjid. Want to make sure that that person is committed to their oath. And they would basically be in the Masjid, perhaps in the Masjid al-Nabawi, perhaps maybe in Mecca, or perhaps in the situation that they're in, maybe facing Qibla, or maybe while sitting down, or maybe in front of a crowd. Okay, and let's say, should they sit down or what should happen? How do we understand giving that sanctity to let the person recognize the value and the magnificence of what they are right now going to be facing? You're making an oath, but this oath is going to be witnessed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We're going to take your word for it, but we need you to recognize that this is now making you as basically facing Allah and putting Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as your witness. That's how serious this oath that you're making is. Now it's not me believing you. Now it's you putting Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as basically the witness, and therefore it will come back to you. Whether it's in you getting cancer, maybe you getting, I don't know, a bad omen, something happening to you, and that's going to come back to you. من كان حالفا فليحلف بالله أو ليصمت. Okay, so how should we make that oath? We're going to make it basically in saying the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, billahi, wallahi, tallahi. All of those are basically considered as valid ways for making the yameen. Well, so can we also say like Wallahi alladhi la ilaha illa hu, or making something, yes, it's in regards to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay, what about using the Quran? So some of the Shafi'i scholars had basically said that one can actually make an oath using Quran. Ibn al-Arabi said that was an innovation. Said no Sahabi had ever done that, and that using the Quran as a way to make an oath is an innovation and not acceptable. But of course, Shafi'i himself had said, well, I had seen some people do it, like Ibn Mazin, and he was this judge in Sana'a in Yemen, and he would basically let them recognize that sanctity of the Quran and recognize the sanctity of what oath you're making. Okay, so we're going to stop right here, inshallah. If there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer them really quick, inshallah. Oh dear, what happened? Any questions? All right, I guess everybody is wanting to just end it right now. So that is absolutely fine. And inshallah, we will see you all tomorrow, inshallah. And assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Let me just end